So then what happens when an ethnic cleansing is defined as a genocide? The Genocide Convention was adopted by the UN in 1948, post-Holocaust, and then entered into force really in 1951. Genocide, as defined by the United Nations in Article 2, defines the act as a killing of members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members, deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent the birth within a group, and forcibly transferring children from the group to another. According to the Geneva Convention, then, if an act is defined as a genocide, the United Nations must send UN peacekeeping troops. In the 21st century, we rarely see acts defined as a genocide. So, what is the history of genocide in Rwanda? We're going to break this down as the who, what, where, when, why of the situation. In Rwanda in 1884 and 85, we know that superimposed boundary lines from the Berlin Conference created a dramatic power struggle in the region. The Tutsis, who in 1994 made up 15% of the population, were considered under Belgian rule to be superior because they were considered to be more white. The Hutus, then in 94, who obviously was the way bigger of the ethnicity, the 84%, were discriminated against under Belgium's rule. This is important because this set up a power conflict that would not go away. In 1959, the Hutu government gained control of Rwanda. And in 62, Rwanda officially declared their independence. Immediately, a civil war between the Hutus and the Tutsis broke out. In 1990, the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, established by refugees of the Civil War, enters into Rwanda in addition to the UN forces to really help fight against this conflict. What we have to understand then by 1990 is that the Rwandan Patriotic Front was full of Tutsis. The United Nations knew that the conflict was serious enough that they needed to get involved. In 1993, then, you had some events in Burundi, the neighbor of Rwanda, that is really going to reunite or ignite tensions between the two groups. The first Hutu president of Burundi is killed, and violence immediately follows. In 1994, the Hutu president of Rwanda and the second Hutu president of Burundi die in a very suspicious plane crash. Immediately, then, war and conflict breaks out. In 1994, 11 UN peacekeepers are murdered, and the United Nations officially withdraws from the conflict. This sets the stage for April of 1994, when the genocide officially begins. What about Darfur? Darfur, which is in Sudan, is another example here of a genocide. This took place again in Sudan. So here is the state of Sudan as it was. And then you can obviously see Darfur, which is a small area over here to the west. Why did this take place? This conflict again goes back a very long time, back to 1956 with the civil war in Sudan. This is following independence of Sudan from Britain rule, where in the north, your Arab Muslims, led by Omar al-Bashir, who was also an Arab, were in conflict with the Black Christians in the south, who were the farmers. So you can see the farmers versus the herders were not only going to have conflict based on ethnicity, but also on land. In Darfur, there's about 6 million in terms of population at the time. And the ethnic tension between the, quote, Black Arabs and the Black African population continued to grow. Competition for land between the herders and the farmers. And then the tribes in this region, again, led to desertification, or was a consequence, rather, of desertification, which again left a lot of that land to fight over. So, when did this take place? The conflict began in 2003 when a rebellion by the Black Africans in Darfur attacked military installations and the government of Sudan, which, again, remember, was run by Omar al Bashir, a Black Arab, and accused the government of ignoring Africa in regards to not sharing the oil wealth with this region. In 2003, the genocide officially begins. Both of these genocides are documented in your reading. So, then what about the 8 stages of genocide? Dr. Greg Stanton identified, he was the Department of State, identified in 1996 8 different stages that take place for a genocide to occur. The first is classification, creating kind of an us versus them or a separation ideology. When classification systems have no chance to fade by, saying that those of different ethnicities can't marry or can't procreate, separation really becomes solidified between the two. The idea then is to create a power struggle. In the case of Rwanda, this happened with Belgium when they split the group or the people living there into 2 major ethnicities, the Tutsis and the Hutus. In Darfur, it was the Africans, the Black Africans versus the Arabs. Again, very little difference between the groups, but enough for that classification to take place. In stage 2, we see symbolization, giving a name or a symbol to the classification. What we see then in the case of Rwanda were ID cards, like the one pictured on this page, having to use an identification card that gives you a symbol where it actually says your ethnicity right here on the card. When we look at these, so you can see Tutsi right here, we see this as a symbol of hatred. In Darfur, it really came down to the color of their skin. In stage 3, we have dehumanization. Remember, the genocide has not taken place yet until stage 7. One group here then denies the humanity of the other. What this does is it helps to overcome the normal human revulsion against murder. And then hate propaganda is used, belittling your victims. In Rwanda, we saw hate radio used to broadcast messages such as kill the cockroaches or destroy the cockroaches. Don't let them infect your kids. This hate radio was a major aspect of the genocide in Rwanda. In Darfur, we see the Africans who are referred to as slaves. This very derogatory term used to create superiority among the two. Stage 4 is organization. We have to understand genocide is a group crime and it must be organized. So this is where the state, so the actual government of that country usually organizes and arms and usually financially supports your militias. And then plans are made for a final solution. In Rwanda, we had the Hutu power that came to existence here. The Interwame is what they were called. They were armed youth in Rwanda who the government supported with 500,000 machetes and weapons, and then trained them. And you'll see that in the movie later in the week as to how to exterminate the other group. In Darfur, we call this group the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed were the armed Arab militia, again, given tanks and weapons, and then the blueprints of the villages to plan their attack. Stage 5 is polarization. This is the physical separation or division of your groups. And this is where your hate group broadcast really comes into play. And then passing laws to forbid intermarriage. In Rwanda, this was your moderate Hutus who were killed, and the radio being used by the government to really force this separation and this hatred. In Darfur, the president of Sudan, who said he would protect the Black Africans, did not, and essentially making it impossible for humanitarian work to get to this population. And then stage 6 is preparation. This is where the final preparation for the genocide takes place, forcing your victims into ghettos or concentration camps. In Rwanda, this is where your government openly discussed the extermination at cabinet meetings, armed your militia groups, manipulated family ties, really forced that preparation of the genocide. And in Darfur, these villages, we were already isolated. So those that survived